Well, that took a while. I really didn't expect this video to take so long to come out, but I had quite a bit of learning to do just in this first video. Texturing stuff, camera stuff, a lot of texturing stuff, but nonetheless, I've put together 5 concepts and models for some custom last word ornaments. I started this off like a normal gunsmithing project. I got a 4K image and looked at it for a while. Eventually I got some ideas and started photoshopping them. And in no time I had 5 ornaments thrown together. I didn't spend quite as long photoshopping these as I usually would, since they're mostly just reference for the 3D models. The first is this iron banner ornament. It looks quite a bit like Steady Hand, but I need simple ideas for this first video. The next is even simpler. It's based on Trials of the Nine. Then I made one based on the Menagerie event. This one looks pretty cool. The next is based on the Mars winter camo weapons like 18 Kelvins. And lastly, this one is based on the moon weapons. This has to be my favorite, and it ended up being the hardest one to model by far. I started with the simplest one, the Trials of the Nine ornament. All it needs is a different texture and these little symbols. My base model is this STL that I downloaded from Destiny STL Generator. That'll be linked in the description. It's great because you can download a model of just about any item from Destiny 1 or 2. The downside is that the model is usually pretty rough. Some areas have this mess of polygons that you need to sort out, but after some cleaning up, it looks pretty good. The first thing I did is model these little symbols here, and give the model some shaders that resemble the color scheme. This looks pretty lame though. I'm gonna need some actual textures, but I want to know more about how textures work. I was able to use the texture system to some extent, but I really didn't understand it until now. Here's a little explanation of how the textures I make work. If this is too boring, here's a timestamp for when I'm done rambling. The main 3 components to the textures I made are the original texture, the bump map, and the reflection map. The original texture is just going to show up as color, while the reflection map changes the reflectivity of different surfaces on your texture. And lastly, the bump map will give the appearance of small height differences, to make the texture not look so flat. Not every texture I made used all 3, but it was nice to have the option. You can see that the bump and reflection maps are black and white, because remember, the color is being drawn from the original texture. So these maps only need a brightness value to dictate how high or low, or reflective or dull an area is. I hope that makes sense. To try and get an understanding of how I would make my own gun texture, I looked at the original last word texture. I could immediately tell that there were something like 5 or more layers going on here. There's this blackening at the end of the barrel and a bunch of different scratches, smudges, and chips. I noticed that a lot of these looked like they were hand-drawn, so I figured I'd just try and jump right in and experiment a little with my own textures. I did this for a few days and got pretty lame results. I started by making a flat-colored, high-resolution image, like really high resolution. Then I made new layers and drew on imperfections by hand. But without some kind of special brush tool, making scratches and smudges is actually super hard. After a few textures not working this way, I decided to try another approach. Instead of drawing the detail, I had Photoshop generate it for me. I messed around with all kinds of filter effects here, but the one I liked the most was this fibers effect. It generates vertical lines along your texture, and there's a few parameters you can mess with here to get the right results. Using this with a good reflection map ended up looking a lot like the scratches that I assume are marks from milling that you see on real steel. I used this for the bottom black metal. I screwed around with a lot of different Photoshop filters for this top part. I started to get some cool results by generating noise and applying filters to the noise after it was generated. I eventually ended up with this really cool marble look that I think fits the weapon theme pretty well. And even though it doesn't resemble the original concept, I like this design better. Here it is. I decided the next should either be the Iron Banner ornament or the Mars one. I went with the Mars one since making that medallion seemed pretty intimidating, but the Mars ornament definitely had its own challenges. First off, this ornament won't have this crazy pattern, so I gave it a different color variation of the steel texture I made earlier. The next thing I wanted to get out of the way was that digital winter camo. I really had no idea how to do that. Eventually, I figured there was no use in using a high-res image or any bump map or reflection maps here. I ended up actually drawing a tiny pixel art of the exact pattern. At first it looked like this, because of the way it was scaled up when I exported it in Photoshop. Luckily, after changing a setting, it was looking pretty good. That black color didn't change too much on the rest of the gun. Next up, it was time to make the little bits and bobs. First is this. It goes under the barrel and replaces the laser sight. After some modeling and texturing, here it is. I tried to do this little orange circle, but it just looks so stupid. Eventually I got it looking okay. This sight piece on top ended up being somewhat simple to make. The hardest part was this stupid wire. After turning on some nice lighting effects, here's the Mars winter camo ornament. The little pieces I add don't look too bad. It's cool to see the sight piece in 3D. Alright, it's time to bite the bullet and get to work on that Iron Banner ornament. I got right into trying to crack this medallion. There was a lot of just sitting and thinking. I went with one of the approaches that I thought could work. I copied the medallion over to an empty texture, and as you can see, it needed a lot of scaling up. Also, it's facing off to its left. I need it facing head on if I want a decent texture. Luckily, I was able to skew it to a point that seemed like it might work. I then made a rough model for the coin, and after making a bump and reflection map, applying them and lining them up, wow, this looks way too good. Obviously, it's kinda low res and not perfectly lined up, but I don't really care. It actually looks so good it makes the rest of the weapon look terrible. Really, the only other thing to do is make the steady hand part of the barrel. The shape took a little bit of work, and so did the texture. I couldn't figure out how to do this hexagon pattern, so I just resorted to generating something else that looked cool in Photoshop. You could call this cutting a corner, but I considered this project a learning and practice kind of thing, and that pattern wasn't something I was really wanting to get caught up on. And now it's done! Except for the cool animations, I had to make those too. Here it is for real. It's kind of funny since the realistic looking coin doesn't really fit in with how basic the rest of the gun looks. One gun closer to the dreaded moon ornament, and now only one gun away. Which means we're on the Menagerie Ornament. The main challenges with this one are this golden structure on the barrel from Austringer, and the purple gems within that structure, plus this little inset purple gem over here. After bringing the colors to a point I was happy with, I started working on that golden structure. It was actually a lot of fun to model. It's really satisfying figuring out the solutions to these problems. Making the geometry do what you want it to is difficult, but really fun when you get good at it. After I made these spots for the gems, I went ahead and made the gems that go in them. The shape was fairly easy, but the texture was another story. I eventually got a layered purple noise that I liked, but I wanted the gem to have a glassy, translucent look, kinda like the original has. I'm using the EV render engine, not Cycles, so this kind of thing can be kinda tricky. Eventually I ended up with something that I liked. Now I had everything I needed to make those circular gems on the sides. I was able to achieve a pretty cool look here by booleaning a hole in the side of the steel, and then scaling the gem and surrounding metal down. This makes it look like a small medallion or charm or something that's been socketed directly into the weapon. I bring you the Menagerie Ornament. Everything here looks pretty clean and vibrant. This is probably the best model so far. I guess that means that there's only one ornament left. I literally heard boss music start playing when I made this blend file. I'll never forget how tedious it was to cut out those stupid cubes, and now I've got to model them. I've also got to figure out these charms. Hopefully they'll work the same way as the Iron Banner medallion did. And I don't even want to think about how I'm going to do those feathers. I spent a while getting the colors just right. That's one of the coolest parts of this ornament, the silver steel and wooden grit. I achieved the wood texture by using a variation of that fiber filter. Next, I went after that charm the same way I did with the medallion. I'd say it looks about as good as the medallion did. Later, I ended up messing with the texture some more and getting it to look even better. Next up is the tedious process of making that cube string. The idea is that you have metal cubes connected by a string running through them all. This means that the cubes all need to touch, but not by more than it takes for a string to pass through the connection. I'm not really modeling a string, it's more of an imaginary constraint to get the shape right. So I somewhat haphazardly rotated and placed these one on top of the other, while still maintaining the direction towards the top of the barrel. You can see that these cubes don't press directly against the gun, since the chain would be fairly rigid. To make the other side, I just duplicated it and connected it on the top and bottom. Now we've got a metal cube string wrapping all the way around the barrel. Now I've just got to make two more. Before I did that though, I decided to mess around with the silver texture some more. I wanted it to look a little less clean. It should look at least somewhat rugged and used. I ended up painting some brown kind of dirt rust color around the edges of the texture, and this made it look so much better. Then I carried on making the other chains and charms. When they were done, they resembled the reference almost perfectly. Next I had to start working on the stuff going on at the end of the barrel. The first thing is another cube chain. This was a bit difficult, but fairly straightforward. Next is this blue band going around. I actually didn't explain in the reference how or why it just clips through or disappears in front of the sight. So here I decided to make the band actually wrap over the sight, since there wasn't enough room for it to go around. I guess I could have placed it under the cube chain, but whatever, it's too late now. Plus, the band going over the sight ended up looking kinda cool, even if it absolutely decimates your aim. The pattern on the band was another one of those patterns that was just out of my skill range, so I got something that looked almost kinda close. It's not great looking, but I figured I shouldn't stall on this for too long. I'd better get to making those feathers. I honestly wasn't really concerned with making the feathers look great. I was mostly concerned with making them work at all. I thought to actually model them and get the texture from the reference, like I did with the medallions and charms. But the shape of a feather is so intricate and natural that there's no way I could make one without hours and hours of practice. I ended up having to do it the crappiest and most primitive way possible. I cut out the best looking feather and imported it as a plane. This gives you a really glitchy and completely flat PNG that I really can't make a bump or reflection map for. I tried duplicating it to make the other feathers, but when I layered them, they had this super weird effect that made them clip between layers. And it was overall just a mess. So I instead chose to duplicate and layer the feathers within Photoshop. This also meant that I could color and scale these to give them some kind of variation. Then I could import this long strip of feathers, add loop cuts, and contour it to the shape of the gun. This was much more simple in theory. This weird blender stuff wasn't mentioned in the theory. This is it. The culmination of everything I've learned from the other ornaments. The end result of dozens of hours of designing and modeling is finally complete. I bring you the moon ornament. This video was so much fun to make. I really enjoyed the whole process of creating these models. I listened to way too much Powerwolf and created way too many textures. Turns out 10,000 by 10,000 textures and several hour-long screen recordings fill up your hard drive pretty quick. Still not as bad as my Varix video. I hope this video wasn't too long or boring. I'll probably make 3 ornaments per video in the future, so that I get more time to focus on each of them. The next video should come out quicker and the weapons should look better too. Before that though, I'm thinking of making a quick tutorial on creating an animation like the one in my update video, as requested by RooTube. That really shouldn't take too long. I also want to thank Gami for algorithm boosting me with comments. I'm pretty sure half of the comments on my channel are this guy saying yo. I really appreciate it. I'll talk to you later. Thanks. Take care.